So I am going to give a bit of an introduction to Anitra, just short and sweet, and then she's going to give about a 20-minute or so presentation of her main ideas, her main message, and then I'll share some reflections and maybe ask her some questions, and then we'll go to questions from you guys, from the audience. Okay, so Anitra Nelson is an activist scholar affiliated with the Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute at the University of Melbourne, Australia. Her main academic activities coincide with political and philosophical interests. And she has written a lot of interesting stuff actually, and you can find that on her website, which I think Toya is going to share in the chat. And her main books on her website include Small is Necessary, Shared Living on a Shared Planet, Exploring DeGrowth, A Critical Guide, Food for DeGrowth, Life Without Money, and most recently, Beyond Money, a Post-Capitalist Strategy, which is very interesting to me because I've also been working on post-capitalist strategies. So it'll be fun to have the discussion afterwards. But I'm going to hand it over to Anitra now to give us her insights into post-capitalist strategies and Beyond Money. Thanks, Anitra. It's over to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And yes, many thanks to the Researchers Desk for inviting me to talk. And thanks for timing it early in your morning, because I'm Wednesday, the 16th of March, but here in Australia, it's early evening, it's 6 p.m. I don't have any slides. As Jennifer said, my website and email addresses have been popped into chat. And those details can be freely shared to find out more about my work, to contact me. And we've also put in a 30% discount code for my book too. Before I start, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge elders past, present and future of the Kulin Nation, from whose unceded stolen lands I speak, specifically the Djarawang, also known as the Jara peoples. This land always was and always will be their land. I've been working on sustainability from various angles for decades. I perceive the climate crisis, the runaway level of carbon emissions, as the mere symptom of the very grave condition of planetary ecosystems. Rising carbon emissions and global heating are like a fever. As many international experts come together to reduce carbon emissions in United Nations climate change conferences, they attend mainly to the fever. Even if they did that efficiently, which they don't, addressing the high temperature is not enough. We must understand the causes. Here, the breakdown of multiple ecosystems often result from economic activities, as profit-making and growth lead to more expansive and intensive activities affecting Earth as well as people. Interestingly, in this respect, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Working Group 2 has favourably mentioned degrowth more than a dozen times, with ample degrowth references in its very recent February report, Impacts, Adaptation and Vulnerability. So we can see some changes there. My interest in money, not simply capitalism, as the source of growing socio-political inequities and ecological sustainabilities, started a long time ago as an environmentalist, a creative writer and artist, and as a women's liberationist. In all these fields, people bang their heads up against money as a dominating but socially and ecologically irrational value. Prices are set at a level people are prepared to pay rather than reflecting their real social and ecological inputs. Many people contribute unpaid or lowly paid work that is absolutely critical and valuable, And much of this work enables advocates of capitalism to say that the system is great, when in fact, a lot of great work is done despite capitalism, not because of it. In various ways, market-based systems exploit people and earth. When I talk about money, I refer not only to exchange value, to prices, but to all of our relations of trading, credit and debt, as well as to budgeting and calculations made by managers and accountants in firms. Money's main function is as a unit of account or standard of value. Think a euro or a dollar. So monetary economies typically allow people to have private property and exchange it using money, and allow private firms to develop to produce for trade. The prices that evolve in these markets relate to traders and trading conditions, not to values of people in general or earth. Markets cut people out who have no money, or if people are without money, to buy the goods and services they need. The living natural systems of earth are treated like simple commodities without any regard or necessary regard to keeping ecosystems intact. So social inequities and ecological unsustainability are the two great challenges of our times. They focus the attention of environmentalists and social activists, defining, for instance, the aims and strategic concerns of degrowth activists. First, degrowth advocates argue that we need economic practices that deliver everyone's basic needs, neither more nor less. That is, economies based on enough or sufficiency. Second, we need to integrate the regenerative needs of Earth into everyday economies of care and reproduction. But market economies are simply not designed to fulfill everyone's basic needs and adjust to and regenerate the Earth. So it's not surprising that people are coming up with new ideas for economies, such as circular economies, donut economies, degrowth, and solidarity economies. My argument is that we need non-monetary economies, real value economies that focus on satisfying everyone's basic needs, neither more nor less. Production on demand offers an economy aimed at localized collective sufficiency and satisfying needs we can't fulfill locally from as close sources as possible. So now I'll sketch that kind of economy based on production for demand before talking about moving away from production for trade. This is a world based on real values, social and ecological values, a world where we co-govern together, deciding what we make, do, and get. Imagine a global network of collectively sufficient cell-like communities, each responsible for the sustainability of the local environs of which they live. Communities of various sizes living within sub-bioregions, offering direct, efficient ways of fulfilling their needs, producing locally, close to end users. Imagine each diverse, empowered community caring for Earth, organised horizontally, relatively autonomous, and seamlessly networked globally. These communities use governance systems such as assemblies and networks that are common in activist and solidarity movements today, and in eco-collaborative intentional communities with personal property but no private property. The entire Earth is commons with clear and universal principles for commoning, sharing land through secure and fair use rights. We all contribute a set amount of time to collective production. In return, all our basic needs are met. So each household guesstimates their basic needs annually. Working groups report on the potential of the local area and of locals to fulfill these various needs. We all plan how we will create and care for things and together decide who gets what. Then we work and monitor and tweak how to fulfill those orders all year round. Once established, planning mainly relies on updating previous calculations and taking into account seasonal natural factors. We produce goods and services, say corn, apples, solar electricity, potable water, and clothes, for particular already specified people. This is production on demand. We don't need money or markets. Every service or thing created goes directly to those people who ordered them. We discuss and negotiate what I call compacts to differentiate them from monetary contracts. And in compacts, we are negotiating to produce for and to receive from neighbouring or more distant communities those goods and services that we can't find or make locally. We don't overconsume or go without or waste. We pass on or leave things we don't need in spaces for others to use them. We have collective stores for emergencies and to fill unforeseen gaps. This production is efficient and effective and economic in terms of the real values important to people and planet. So production for trade markets and money is replaced with local decision-making, direct production on demand, and distribution on the basis of need. Decision-making focuses on real, diverse, biophysical, ecological, and social measures and values. The reward for contributing to collective daily tasks is the lifelong security of communally meeting our and Earth's basic needs. We engage together respectfully to make decisions on local production and on the terms of exchange of compacts with producers beyond our community. My main argument is that real social and ecological values offer the democratic and materialist terms for replacing money as the organising principle of society. Collectively satisfying everyone's basic needs, we would fulfil our real human potential as creative, active beings with real freedom, real liberation, and real power. In short, the first 3 chapters of my book, Beyond Money, a Post-Capitalist Strategy, deal in great detail with the 2 great challenges co-created by capitalism: socio-political and economic inequities and ecological unsustainabilities, and this alternative of a non-monetary economy, which I call Yenemon, which is no money, spelled backwards. The remaining 5 chapters are based on movements and activism. They flesh out problems with monetary economies, the weaknesses of reforms, and identify other critics and activism focusing on going beyond money. In chapter 4, I examine key concerns of the environmental movement, such as responses to global heating and water scarcity, and the fatal weaknesses of market-based approaches, such as carbon and water trading, and particularly carbon offsets. In contrast, I highlight a series of critiques of market-oriented environmentalism, such as the non-monetary in-kind economy of Otto Neurath, an influential socialist 100 years ago. Neurath argued that during World War I, the German economy had been planned very much in an in-kind way, and that socialist planning was only possible by going beyond money and working with in-kind values. Of course, I argue for planning instead at the grassroots, by relatively autonomous communities, and for a world based on real values. This concept, real value, is similar to use value, inasmuch as both relate to qualities and purposes of things. Yet, real values go beyond use value to refer to the actual and potential diverse values of living things and take account of every constituent in actual and holistic human and ecological needs. Think of the way that biologists, Indigenous peoples, and ecologists talk about the world. Even the ways you might make decisions weighed up in terms of social, ethical, and environmental pros and cons, putting real values ahead of economic aspirations or advantage. An infinity of real values fills the entire space of a non-monetary economy. I learned that we could divide up the work between us and take greater care of ecological values when I lived in eco-collaborative communities whose missions were focused on the well-being of both community and nature. Chapter 5 reviews certain developments within women's liberation, mainly eco-feminist thought and action around subsistence economies, work, exchange value, and human liberation. This chapter draws on minority world feminist concerns with conditions in the majority world that all point to commoning worldwide. I refer too to majority world feminist Vandana Shiva, who argues a way forward that relocates humans within nature via agroecology, drawing on ancient, sustainable, and traditional farming systems based on ecological systems. And she advocates relocalization, non-violent cooperativism, small-scale farming, biodiversity, and extending women-driven food provisioning based on sharing and caring and on conservation and well-being. I identify two determinately non-monetary activist tendencies in the works and practices of queer feminist Habermas and the German experiments with exchange-free and barter-free communities. Chapter 6 offers original perspectives on capitalist and appropriate technologies and that debt which is peculiar to capitalism, investment. Investments mean that implicit debts increase as capitalism grows. Sophisticated high-tech mystifies production, so workers feel incapable of taking over decision-making. Digital technology not only increases consumption of unnecessary wants and goods with planned obsolescence, but also corporate and government services tend to force use of mobile phones and apps, for instance. These new technologies absorb profits and necessary investment to keep the whole system going. In contrast, DeGrowth and other such movements advocate convivial, user-friendly, appropriate technology. Indigenous peoples' movements continue today in their struggle against capitalist forces to practice collective provisioning and feature as such in Chapter 7. There, I argue that the community mode of production on demand based on substantive direct democracy and decision-making focusing on real social and ecological values, is most appropriate for post-capitalist futures. I refer to the Zapatistas and revolutionary Kurdish communities, where political assemblies and other forms of horizontal organising in locales are critical to practical efforts for achieving livelihoods through commoning. The final chapter of Beyond Money argues that intellectual, practical, political, and cultural shifts already underway can benefit by focusing on non-monetary strategies and futures. Capitalist practices, monetary value and monetary relations tend to block system change in any post-capitalist transition to a more equitable and sustainable future. But because capitalist practices require money to exist, non-monetary production and exchange can disable and dismantle capitalist forces to minimize co-option and counter-transformation. That is, as long as they are consciously and conscientiously mobilized to do so. In other words, we all need to understand how and why we need to go beyond money to operate in everyday life with respect to people and earth. In short, I conclude that the key distinction between capitalist and ideal post-capitalist practices is collective decision-making based on real values and humane relationships. Moving beyond money in these ways allows us to build a world based on social and environmental values appropriate for the survival of humanity and planetary sustainability. That's it.